long time ago, humans created pieces of art that look something like this. While these artworks look extremely imaginative and vibrant, they lack one key ingredient: depth. Thousands of years later, in the Renaissance period, artists discovered a new concept that allowed them to create the illusion of depth. And that concept is perspective.
Well, if you think about it, the surfaces that we draw on, be it whether it's a paper, it's a drawing tablet, or a monitor screen, these are all 2D surfaces. And how do we create the illusion of depth when drawing on these 2D surfaces? How do we show that the object that we are drawing is a 3D form? That's where perspective comes into play. The two main things that you need to remember about perspective is, firstly, the horizon line. Think about the horizon line as the eye line, where it's an imaginary line that separates the sky from the ground. This is especially clear if you go out to the seaside and you look beyond the sea. So one thing to note about the horizon line is that if you bring up the horizon line by lowering your point of view, the ground will appear larger than the sky. Conversely, if you lower the horizon line by elevating your point of view, the sky would appear to occupy a bigger space compared to the ground.
One easy way of finding where the horizon line is to look at the object in the scene. Any object that is below the horizon line, you will be able to see the top side of the object. Any object that is above the horizon line, you should be able to see the bottom side of the object.
Here are some examples of artworks done by other artists, and you can see how they play with shifting the horizon line to tell different stories. Over here, in this first example, the horizon line is placed pretty high up on the canvas, and therefore you can see the top side of this inverted pyramid structure. In this next example, we can see that the horizon line is placed relatively low on the canvas, and because of that we can kind of have like a worm's eye view of the environment. We are looking up on the environment. This next example, the horizon line is pretty high up on the canvas, and that's why we can see the top side of this lake. Finally, this is more of a traditional view, a less distorted view of an environment. The horizon line is placed relatively close to the midpoint of this 3D rendering, and therefore you don't see a lot of top side or bottom side of an object. But the clearest indication would be the keyboard and the mouse over here, where you can actually see the top side. The second concept that you need to know to do accurate perspective drawing is that of the vanishing point. Vanishing points are imaginary points along the horizon line where you can draw guidelines from when constructing your drawing. Note that it is possible for vanishing points to exist outside the canvas. As a rule of thumb, if the vanishing point exists within the canvas and your canvas is relatively small, the objects that you draw would tend to look a little bit more distorted as compared to if the vanishing points are located outside the canvas. The object that you'll be drawing will look, I guess, more regular. It doesn't have that fish eye kind of effect. One phenomenon to note when it comes to vanishing point is that objects that are closer to the camera will tend to look bigger, and as it recedes and goes into the vanishing point, the object will look smaller and smaller. So comparing this row of chairs over here, you can see that even though their size is supposed to be the same, the front chair that's closest to us will look bigger compared to the chair that is furthest from us. In this chapter, we will only be focusing on the three fundamental perspective types, namely the 1 point, the 2 point, and the 3 point perspective. In reality, you can add as many number of points of perspective on your illustration. You can even do a fisheye kind of distortion effect on your illustration. Nothing is impossible in art, but for the sake of going back to the basics, we will just be talking about these three fundamental perspective types. A drawing has a 1 point perspective when it contains only one vanishing point that is sitting on the horizon line. This type of perspective is typically used for images of roads, railway tracks, hallways, or buildings viewed in an angle such that the front is facing the viewer. One thing to note is that the horizontal lines are always parallel to each other, and they are perpendicular to the vertical lines. So to sum it up, to put it in simpler English, the 1 point perspective have two sets of parallel lines, the horizontal lines and the vertical lines. Okay, in this first exercise, we will be attempting to draw boxes in a 1 point perspective. First, we will try to establish the horizon line. Note that while drawing all these guidelines, try to do it with a light mark so you can erase them if needed later on. Next, we will identify the vanishing point. The vanishing point should be sitting on the horizon line. Next up, I will be extending diagonal lines from the vanishing points. These are my guidelines so that I can draw the objects. I will extend 4 lines from the vanishing point to help me with the construction of the box. Next, I will extend a horizontal line. This horizontal line should be parallel to the horizon line. I then seal up the line like this in the form of a box. Note that the vertical lines are parallel to one another and they are perpendicular to the horizontal lines. Next, I draw a box at the back of the front box, and then I connect these 2 boxes up using the guidelines that I drew at the start. Just to clean up my lines. And there you have it, a box in perspective. In this next exercise, we will be duplicating rectangles in perspective. I'll be using the same horizon line and same vanishing point that I used for exercise 1. And I'll extend 2 guidelines from the vanishing point. The first thing I'll do is I will draw a horizontal line using the guidelines as a reference and keeping it parallel to the horizon line. Next, I will draw another horizontal line at the back and connecting them using the guidelines as a reference. And there I have it. I have a box, a plane that is sitting on the ground. Alright, next I would like to duplicate this box in perspective. So I want to draw the same box, but I want to recede it back into space. So how do I do that? First, I will do a cross section of the plane, this box, by drawing an X connecting the front left corner to the back right corner and the front right corner to the back left corner, creating an X essentially. Next, I will note down the place where the two lines, the two diagonal lines crisscross, and this is the midpoint of the box. I'll extend a line from the vanishing point to this midpoint to create a third guideline. Next, with this guideline, I will pinpoint the place where the back line is intersecting with this midpoint line. I will then draw a cross once again, but this time connecting the front right corner to the midpoint of the back line. Next, I'll do the same for the front left corner. And from there, I can actually find where the line is supposed to be drawn, where the third horizontal line is supposed to be drawn. And by connecting the lines, I can then create the second box that is 1 unit away from the original box. Using this same approach, I can then plant out where the third box is supposed to be. So once again, I draw a line that intersects the front right corner, that connects the front right corner to the midpoint of the back line. And then I'll do the same for the front left corner. And then I'll draw a horizontal line that connects these 2 points and connect them, thereby creating the third box. I hope my explanation is clear enough. If you still have any issues grasping this concept, do let me know. Okay, so you must be wondering why, what's the point of duplicating rectangles in perspective? Well, a simple kind of practical application will be that sometimes you might need to duplicate certain elements in a drawing. Say for instance, maybe you're drawing a lamppost, right? And typically the lampposts, they are spaced out pretty evenly on the street. In this third exercise, we will attempt to mirror rectangles in perspective. So I'll just start by drawing 2 guidelines. This time around, I'm not drawing the horizon line or creating a vanishing point. So the horizon line and the vanishing points are technically still there, but they are outside the canvas. So I start by plotting a rectangle along the guideline. Next, I will mark out where I want the mirror point to be. I'll use this as a reference and I will mirror this rectangle over onto the other side. I start by creating a cross on the rectangle that I just drew, connecting the alternate front and end sides, thereby finding the midpoint and extending another guideline across the midpoint. From there, I can find out exactly where the midpoint of the mirror is. Right now, I'm just extending my guidelines because the resulting rectangle would be much deeper into space than originally anticipated. Next, I extend another line from the front right corner, and this line should intersect with the midpoint of the mirror. I will do the same for the back left corner. Okay, once that is done, I have identified 2 points. Next, I will extend another line from the front right corner, and then finally another line from the back right corner. Okay, something like that. So by doing so, I have identified 4 points along the guideline, and I can construct a rectangle from these guidelines. Okay, let me lower the opacity of my guidelines, and there you have it. 2 rectangles that are mirror of one another in perspective. Alright, so what are the normal kind of application for this? Why do we need to be so precise in terms of constructing rectangles in perspective? Of course, using rectangles is an easy way to teach this concept, but for a real world kind of application, you can think of it as, for example, you are drawing a vehicle, and typically a vehicle would have symmetrical, or at least the placement of the wheels is kind of symmetrical from one another. So something like that. Of course, you don't have to do this for your exercise. I'm just showing you some real world applications of this concept. One of the most common type of perspective that you would observe in the real world would be the 2-point perspective. A drawing has 2-point perspective when it contains 2 vanishing points that are sitting on the horizon line. Note that these vanishing points can be placed arbitrarily along the horizon, but once you have identified these 2 vanishing points, you should stick to them. Like the position of these vanishing points are fixed once you set them. This is so that the resulting drawing will be accurate in perspective. Alright, the next exercise we will be doing is to draw a box in a 2-point perspective. As with the 1-point perspective, we will start off with a horizon line, and this time instead we will mark down 2 points for the 2 vanishing points, to denote the 2 vanishing points. Next, we will extend horizontal lines from the vanishing point, like this. Okay, once you have like 4 guidelines drawn, you can actually plot down the box that is on the ground. One thing to note that I forgot to mention earlier is that for 2-point perspective, there's only one pair of parallel lines, and usually it's the vertical lines that are parallel to one another. If you notice, the horizontal line now it's not parallel, only the vertical lines. Alright, to draw the top side of the box, we will be extending more lines from the 2 vanishing points. Alright, next up, exercise 5. Let's draw this slightly more complex looking box in a 2-point perspective. For this one, I will not do a demo. Try it out on your own, and I'll see if you can absorb what I've just taught you. Just a tip, for this particular box, the vanishing points are located outside the canvas. But I'd like to throw this question at you. Can you identify the horizon line? Is it above or below this box? Pause this video and complete the drawing. Alright, the final perspective type that we will be covering for this session will be the 3-point perspective. A drawing has 3-point perspective when it contains 3 vanishing points. 2 of these vanishing points are situated on the horizon line, but one, the third vanishing point, is situated either above or below it. This effect is most prominent when we are looking upwards on a building from the ground level, or when we are looking downwards onto the cityscape from an aeroplane. Note that there are no parallel lines in a 3-point perspective drawing. So to further elaborate, if the third vanishing point is situated below the horizon line, this is typically kind of like a bird's eye view. If the third vanishing point is situated above the horizon line, the resulting image will look like it's captured from a worm's eye view. Alright, for exercise 6, let's draw these boxes in a 3-point perspective. Once again, there will not be any demo. Just look at the diagram and try to replicate it. Pause the video and continue the drawing. Alright, we briefly talked about this in our, first lesson? Yeah, I think during the first lesson, during the warm-up stage. But I'll just briefly mention this point about ellipses. When you're drawing ellipses, take note that there are two lines or axes. The first one is the major axis and the second is a minor axis. For a perfect circle, both the major axis and minor axis are essentially the same, in the sense that they are the same length. But if you're drawing an oval shape, which is, I think, what you will most commonly draw when you're drawing things in perspective, the major axis is basically the line that cuts across the oval shape or the ellipse at the longest dimension, whereas the minor axis is the dividing line that cuts across the ellipse at the shortest dimension. This line, when you cut across the circle, it should be a symmetrical line, meaning when you cut across this side and you fold the top side to the bottom side, the area should be the same. So when you are constructing an ellipse in perspective, the more important axis to take note of would be the minor axis. When you are drawing an ellipse in perspective, the minor axis, you can think of it as an axle in the wheel. Alright, for the final exercise for today, let's draw an ellipse in perspective. So we start off by drawing two guidelines. This is similar to the mirroring of the rectangular plane that we did earlier, where we don't actually draw in the horizon line and the vanishing points. The vanishing point is located outside the canvas. So using the guidelines as a reference, construct a box that looks something like this, and then I will draw a cross in the box. From there I can locate the midpoint, the vertical midpoint and the horizontal midpoint of this box. Okay, so whatever I'm drawing right now, these are all my guidelines for the ellipse. Alright, next I identify these 4 points on the box. Basically, these 4 points are the points where the ellipse will be in contact with the box. Other than that, the outline of the ellipse would be residing within the box. So using that as a guideline, I try to connect the points. I'm going through it multiple times to make sure that the circle is round. One common mistake is to make the circle kind of pinched at the corners. So when drawing, just try to make sure that the curve is smooth. Right, something like that. Of course, right now the circle that I just drew, the ellipse that I just drew, it's closer to a perfect circle. Okay, but what if I'm drawing a circle that is more distorted in perspective? So, for example, if the box is a flatter looking box, I'll just use the box that I created in exercise 2. So in this case, the corners would be a little bit more pinched compared to a perfect circle. We usually associate the application of perspective to hard surface objects such as buildings and vehicles. However, all elements in a scene need to be constructed with perspective in mind. Below are a few examples of applying perspective to human figures to make them look like they are within the same scene as one another. For your homework today, draw the following primitive shapes in perspective using the image as a guideline and reference. Phew, that was a lot to take in. Let me summarize. Today, we learned about the horizon line, vanishing points, and how we can combine these two elements to create images that have a 1-point perspective, a 2-point perspective, and a 3-point perspective. Now, don't worry if you find it difficult to implement all that we have learned today in your artwork. Personally, as someone who likes to draw organic stuff, I find it difficult as well to get my drawings to be as accurate in terms of perspective. And all I can say is that, don't give up, continue to practice, and I'll see you next lesson.